If either your mom or your dad is a narcissist, you might feel like you were really kind of put on this earth to please them. People who grow up with a parent as a narcissist very often feel really invalidated. They feel alone. It's kind of an invisible problem, which I'll talk about more in a moment. And you feel like your needs don't matter. You feel like you're never quite good enough. You might be aware of feeling manipulated into doing things you don't really want to do, but you almost don't see a choice. And you probably feel guilty if you live your life the way you want to live it, you would feel guilty. So if you're feeling manipulated like this, you might want to know for sure, is my parent really a narcissist? So I'm going to share 3 signs that your parent is probably a narcissist. And I'm also going to share 5 strategies that can be very effective in dealing with this problem. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Barbara Heffernan. I was a psychotherapist for over 20 years before I started this channel to bring coaching tools, therapy tools, and information about living a more joyful life really to the whole world. So welcome. Let's talk about one of the first signs, and this is really about your parent being great unless they aren't. Or maybe they were a great parent at a certain point in your life, and then it really went downhill. Or maybe there are some situations in which they really seem to rise to the top, but others which are terrible, all right? So this is very common with a narcissistic parent because a narcissistic parent basically sees their child as an extension of themselves. So it's kind of like, you see this arm? If you're my child, you're my arm. You should be doing what I want you to do, not what you want to do. You can't just go off and do whatever you want to do because you're actually my arm. You are an appendage of me. So that is really the framework of the relationship. And very often when children are young, they actually can be very compliant. I know we have the challenging, terrible twos, right? But for the most part, kids between 3 and 9 or 10 think their parents are amazing, which the narcissist loves. They buy into what they're told by their parents, and the narcissist is going to tell them that they are a wonderful parent, so the child's going to believe that. So really, during those years, when children are naturally compliant, the narcissistic parent may look like a really good parent. But when you go under the surface, it's all about them all the time and not about the child's developmental needs. So a very simple example that I'll share here is a client of mine who, when she was about 5 years old, she wanted to go to this special event wearing hiking boots and a hiking hat and I guess she had some kind of costume, and she really wanted to go wearing this sort of hiking costume to this event. And the mom was like, don't you really want to wear the pretty party dress? And this was not like a fancy family event where I can hear some of the parents listening here. They'd be like, yeah, of course, I got to get my, kid into the appropriate outfit. But this was not that kind of event. It was like a normal, everyday school gathering. And the mom was just like, you don't really want to wear those ugly boots. You want to really wear this pretty dress. And the child was so confused, right? Because the child knew what she wanted, but there's mom convincing her she wants something different. So my client remembers going along with mom. And pretty much her whole childhood was going along with mom because, one, I think mom is right because I buy into what mom tells me because I'm a child. That's what children do. They all do that. And we know what a narcissistic parent is going to say, right? Which is that I'm right. But it also was about that's just easier. It's easier than arguing and doing what mom doesn't want me to do. Now, I just want to say a little bit here about the different types of narcissists because very often, not all the time, but very often the braggart narcissists, the grandiose narcissists are often the father, right? It would often be the male in the family system who would exhibit narcissism in that form. And often narcissism is shown up in the female form in a more covert way, in a more vulnerable, kind of a lower key way. way, but the same basic principle of manipulation for my needs, not my kids' needs. And the gender roles are not always that distinct, right? So it could be crossed over. You have covert narcissists who are the dads or the grandiose narcissists who are the moms. But I just wanted to clarify that a little bit because that gets missed a lot. All right. The second major sign is the amount of admiration that the parent needs. So this can show up in subtle ways as well. This could be like, let's say the child accomplishes something, but when the parent's talking about it, they're mainly focused on how they taught the child or how they encouraged the child or what they did to help the child achieve X, Y, Z. So that parent is always looking for admiration externally, outside the family, and internally. And then what happens when the parent doesn't get the admiration that they want? Well, some narcissists might explode, might get angry, might physically harm you or emotionally demean you, right? They just might get irate if they are not getting we call it kind of the narcissistic supply, the admiration that they want from their child. Other narcissists might just disappear, might just be, oh, you're not giving me what I want, so I'm not going to talk to you for a week. Which is really hard for a child. Children are dependent on their parents. They need their parents emotionally, physically, logistically, right? It's very threatening to a child if a parent just disappears. So that is also sometimes how this manifests. Third major sign is the importance that is put on achievement and appearance. So a narcissistic parent might be very focused actually on how their child looks, or they might favor the child that they feel is the best looking or the best physically, whatever that means, or they might favor the child that's achieving the most, right? But there is a huge emphasis on what we achieve that other people outside the family can recognize and admire. Outside the home, often the whole family system has this tendency to portray their family as perfect outside the home, but inside is a very different story. And the narcissist in particular will be portraying the wonderful family and what a wonderful parent they are, that they've created this wonderful family, but inside the home, they might be belittling their children, their spouse, everybody. Now, the spouse of the narcissistic parent is sometimes like kind of so beaten down and afraid that they can't really do anything to stand up for their children, which is sort of another wound for the child for sure. But other times the spouse is the perfect supply. So I've seen situations where the spouse of the narcissist basically buys into the whole story and therefore plays the same role with the children, so that even though that spouse is not narcissistic, that spouse will try to get the kids to go along and do exactly what the narcissistic parent does. They'll never criticize the narcissistic parent, and they'll never intervene. So you might be listening to this thinking, okay, great. So yeah, my parent's a narcissist. All right, what do I do now? Suggestion number 1, fully accept that the parent will never get it. The narcissistic parent will never understand what it is that they do wrong. They will never understand that their behavior is destructive to you, and they are highly unlikely to change. The fact that you are a separate individual with valid needs and wants and desires of your own will never be understood or acknowledged. So accepting this is very hard, and I often have seen that people do need to work through this with a therapist or other coaches or some kind of support. So that one can be a toughie. Accepting that can really be hard. Okay, the second strategy. This is called the gray rock method. And really what this is this is kind of about making yourself boring, like a gray rock to the narcissist. So if the narcissist looks to you to be their supply to bolster their image of themselves, then making yourself kind of boring and dull, not sharing too much, and not reacting too much, right? Not reacting negatively or positively too much, just kind of muted, can be very effective. This goes with sort of not overreacting, like not attacking the narcissist, not telling the narcissist what they're doing wrong, because that never really helps, right? So the gray rock method is something you may want to consider. Number 3, emotional boundaries. Very big topic. I have an entire video on how to handle being in a relationship with a narcissist that I can link here, which is worth watching. But this is not only about sort of physical boundaries. And with a narcissist, it's never really about telling the narcissist what they can or can't do. It's really about emotionally bounding yourself. So more on that in the other video. Number 4, this is a biggie. Grieving the loss of the hope that your parent will change. Grieving is a necessary process, and we all are influenced by the archetype of what a parent is supposed to be. We all grow up with some sense of the ideal parent, the ideal mother, the ideal father. And there may even have been times where our narcissistic parent fit that ideal, and they certainly told us they fit that ideal, but they didn't. And grieving the loss of the archetype and the loss of the hope that they will change, very important. Because once you do the step number 1 here of fully accepting this, it leads to grief. And a lot of us don't want to grieve. And we're like, no, I'll do anything not to have to grieve, which means I'm going to stay stuck in denial. Grieving, definitely the healthier choice that will help with the 5th strategy, which is to heal. So really the strategy of how do you deal with this is to go through a healing process and acknowledging that having a narcissistic parent is traumatic. I would have many clients come in and say, I didn't have trauma as a child. I was never hit. Now, some narcissists do hit their kids, but many don't actually. Many don't, because it wouldn't be seen as the right thing to do, right? So people would come in and they'd be like, no, I didn't have trauma because I was never physically abused. They gave me enough food and obviously gave me lots of clothes because they wanted me to look really good. But they themselves, as a human being, as a separate person, was invalidated, neglected. It's a form of abuse. So accepting the trauma of that and then healing from it. So how, everybody wants to know how do I heal, right? It's a process. It takes a while. And there's a number of ways you can do it, right? Self-help, for sure. Therapy, the boundary program that I offer really leads you through a process of learning to have better self-esteem, to rewire those beliefs that I don't matter, rewire those feelings of I'm not enough and my needs don't really count. So we really have to rewire that stuff and realize I matter, I do matter, and I do have people in my life to whom I matter. Not everybody, and not the narcissist, but some, right? So really developing that sense of I'm an okay human being is part of the healing. And then learning boundaries which are about me. They're about what will I accept, what won't I? And they won't necessarily change the narcissist's behavior, which is always really hard for people to hear, but it's the truth. So I encourage you, because healing is possible and worth it, and you are worth it. All right, let me know, comment below, let me know what you think of this video, any questions you might have, and I'll see you next week.